murder. A stranger lies dead in Arlington Grange. There are 6 suspects, but which one is the killer? Could it be Mrs. Peacock, lady of the manor and beautiful society hostess? Perhaps Colonel Mustard, military hero and intimate family friend? Is Reverend Green a saint or sinner? Is it Professor Plum, a man with a degree of suspicion? Miss Scarlet, Mrs. Peacock's glamorous stepdaughter? Or Mrs. White, loyal housekeeper and devoted confidant?
Ladies and gentlemen, your host for Cluedo, Richard Madeley.
Thank you. Hello. Good evening and welcome to a brand new series of Cluedo. It's the programme which gives you the chance to play armchair detective as you try to solve the mystery of a murder at Arlington Grange. And that's also the challenge, of course, for our celebrity detectives, who are radio and television presenter Valerie Singleton and from children's television, scientific wizard Johnny Ball. And challenging them tonight, MP and former Health Minister Edwina Currie, and the man behind the Rocky Horror Show and, of course, the Crystal Maze, Richard O'Brien. So welcome to both teams, and the best of luck to them. Well, Cluedo, of course, tests your powers of observation and logic as you try to uncover 3 crucial facts: the room in which the murder was committed, the weapon that was used, and, of course, the identity of the killer. And when tonight's case is solved, we'll be giving you the chance at home to win a fantastic murder mystery weekend in our special Cluedo competition. And that's one extra reason, of course, to concentrate very hard on all the evidence you're about to see. Starting with these important early clues. We do know that the murder was committed with one of 6 weapons. But was it the scissors, the candlestick, the telephone flex, the poker, the syringe and poison, or was it the billiard cue? I can also reveal at this stage that the victim was killed in one of these 6 rooms. Was it the dining room, the drawing room, the billiard room, the library, the kitchen, or was it in the study? Now let's examine the crucial evidence, the events that lead up to the murder itself. On the day of the Arlington hunt, a young man arrives at the Grange looking like the victim of another kind of blood sport.
Some of those look nasty. Oh, looks to me like 1 or 2 of them might need stitches.
It's very good of you to help me like this.
Oh, don't be silly. Yeah, it'd be easier, though, if we had the jacket away. Someone's really got a go at you, haven't they?
Yeah, I thought they were going to kill me. In fact, if the vicar hadn't turned up,
How are you feeling?
Oh, awful. Thanks for the lift.
Lucky few I was passing by. I'm just so dreadfully sorry about...
Damn saboteurs. Good Lord. Who's this van belong to? Walking wounded I may be, but I got past more what's needed.
Why? What's the matter? What happened?
Oh, we had those blasted hunt saboteurs again. Oh, one of them set off a firecracker. Phantom shied and threw me, and then bolted right out into the main road in front of a lorry.
Oh, not Phantom.
Yes. If I ever catch who did it, I will break their necks. Sherry Vicar.
Well, yes, thank you.
Oh, Vicar.
how'd the other half live, eh? Oh, God, Bennett. Must be solid silver. Oh, God. It's them.
heaven's name are you doing here?
I might ask you the same thing.
Mrs. Peacock, who owns this house, also happens to be my patron. And one of your lot was responsible for a horse being killed this morning.
Well, that wasn't me.
Well, maybe it wasn't, but trying to convince Mrs. Peacock will be another matter, so I said you leave as quickly and as quietly as possible.
Too late. Because you know who that is, don't you? That's some of the lot that laid into me this morning. And I'm going to get the police and have them for it.
Oh, for goodness sake! Do you think the police are going to believe you?
No. But you were there as well. You saw who was doing what. They'd have to believe you, wouldn't they?
Those people are my parishioners, my neighbours, my friends.
Well, you better start examining your conscience then, hadn't you, Vicar?
Complete waste of time. The whole thing ruined by a bunch of vermin.
Say nothing of what happened to Phantom.
Yes. Well, at least we managed to teach one of them a lesson this morning.
Yeah. He's going to teach you a lesson in return.
Gordon. What? Who's this?
He's the one.
Damn me, of all the nerve.
Just keep away.
He's one of them. In my house.
Oh, sorry.
I think you better leave now.
Elizabeth, leave this to me.
If he isn't out of here in 2 minutes, he'll get what he deserves.
Disappointed to see you in this sort of company, Viv. Thought you had better taste.
Shut up, you. Wait a minute, what does he mean by that? How the hell do you know him?
I know you as well. I've got a video of you feeding a live fox cub to the hounds.
No, I never.
Yeah, well, we'll see what the police and the RSPCA say when they've seen it. I'm going to report you for assault and grievous bodily harm.
You try making a phone call from here. I'll wrap this around your neck.
No, dear Lord, it's a typical violence, please.
All right. I'll find another phone, but don't go away because I'll be back.
That's blackmail.
Just helping you towards your Christian duty.
Oh, sorry, am I interrupting?
No, not at all. I was just going to be off.
You better get going, or you know what's good for you. After what you did to Phantom, I'm sorry I didn't let you bleed to death.
I'm going. Just as soon as I find my jacket.
It's in the drawing room.
So, where did you meet him?
I can't remember.
Well, he seems to know you well enough.
Oh, Mike, for God's sake.
One thing's for sure, we can't have him talking to the police.
It's all right for you. He hasn't got you on video.
No, but he has a witness, the vicar.
Well, he won't say anything.
Who knows?
In that case, you realize what we're saying. You can't let him leave the house.
Something dreadful's happened.
What's the matter, Mrs. White?
It's that young man. He's dead. He's been murdered.
So Gordon Ferrer, the hunt saboteur, became the huntsman's prey. But who committed the murder? Well, only two people in the studio know that. I'm one of them. And the other, of course, is the killer, who is one of these 6 suspects. Was it Colonel Mustard who silenced the saboteur forever? Did Mrs. Peacock avenge the death of her faithful Phantom? Was Miss Scarlet determined to bury a guilty secret? Did Mrs. White have a motive for murder? Could the Reverend Green commit the ultimate crime? Or did Professor Plum find the fatal formula to save his reputation? So there they are, our 6 suspects, 6 possible murder weapons, and 6 possible rooms. Now, before we begin our inquiries, I'd like our studio detectives, from what they've seen so far, to give me an initial reaction. Valerie, Johnny, what's your gut feeling at this stage?
Well, we had a combined gut reaction, if you like, that it was done in the kitchen. And we think the evidence is so strong that it probably is the syringe and Mrs. Peacock.
You think Mrs. Peacock is the killer?
Why on earth would I do that?
That doesn't get a very strong favourable reaction from the gallery, so we'll just move on now to Edwina and Richard. What's your immediate feeling on this?
Tell him.
Well,
Get him out of his misery.
We thought it was probably done in the drawing room.
Yep.
And we reckoned it was a fairly bloody affair, so it must have been done with a billiard cue.
Nasty weapon, yeah.
And that would need somebody really nasty to do it. And so we think it's Colonel Mustard.
Colonel?
Yeah. Short fuse. The man's got a short fuse.
Yes, now that finds a bit more favour here, but there is a long way to go. In round one, our studio sleuths can now cross-examine all the suspects, but before they begin, just one more piece of very important information. Only the murderer can lie. Only the killer can lie. All the others have to tell the truth. So let's start the cross-examination. Valerie, Johnny, would you please ask your first question?
Right. The first question goes to Miss Scarlett, and we want to know why you were so shocked to see Gordon Ferrer and just exactly what's going on between you. What was going on between you?
Gordon was an old boyfriend of mine, but it obviously was a very embarrassing situation since...
But what's embarrassing about meeting an old boyfriend?
Well, since he'd just been involved in sabotaging our hunt, and obviously he'd got into a little bit of a fracas with one of the members of my family.
Let's move on to the next question, please, Edwina, Richard.
Well, we've got a question for Mrs. White.
Yes.
Now, you're the first person that we see talking to Gordon, looking after him. And we're puzzled as to why he should come to the house, and we wondered whether this was just an accident or a fatal accident. Did you know him beforehand?
Well, you don't get many people with long hair round our way, so I had noticed him before. I didn't know his name, but I knew who he was.
All right, let's continue with the cross-examination. Johnny.
Yes, well, the thoroughly bad lot at the end there, Mr. Colonel Mustard, who rips phones out on a whim. I'd like to know, if you intended to stop this chap leaving the premises, how did you propose to do it?
Well, to keep him in the house would have been quite unrealistic. That was just a fatuous remark by Plum, I'm afraid. To be perfectly frank with you, I would have been quite happy just to give the lout another beating and kick him off the estate as far away from Vivian as possible.
A very pleasant reply. I wonder if it's the truth. Right, Edwina.
We want to have a go at Reverend Green now, if we can. The last time, Reverend, that we saw you, you were talking with Gordon in the kitchen, and he was challenging you about your conscience. What did you do after leaving the kitchen?
I went straight to my automobile, which was sitting outside the kitchen, and meditated for a few minutes upon the situation, and then drove off to my next appointment. And then, of course, Mrs. White stopped me and told me of the dreadful news that this young boy was no longer with us.
All right, we're getting some interesting information here. Another question.
Well, this one goes to Mrs. Peacock. We want to know why you had such a large syringe in a drawer in your study, in your desk, and why you would be filling it with poison.
You're quite correct. That is a large syringe, and it's because it's an animal syringe that I had been given some time ago by our local vet. We have an awful lot of animals at Arlington Grange, and from time to time we've had some accidents, and they've had to be put down.
There was another horse hurt, was there, in the hunt that day, as well as Phantom?
In the hunt that day, yes, as if it wasn't enough for Phantom to have been killed as he was. One of our hounds was also injured, and I had to deal with that on that same day, unfortunately.
So that is why you were filling the syringe. It was to...
It certainly was.
It was to dispatch the hound.
Yes, it was.
All right, thank you. And we have one more question, please.
Yes. Well, we have a question for the professor. And we saw you, sir, last in the billiard room, and you wanted to stop Gordon leaving. Well, now, what exactly did you do about that?
Well, I simply wanted to try and persuade him, dare one say, to forgive me. I was deeply ashamed of the material on the videotape and hoped that I might be able to persuade him to give me that tape in return for some money. My wife is immensely rich, fortunately, and would have understood perfectly.
Thank you, and thank you. Well, we've heard now from each of our 6 suspects, and now our studio detectives have got to make some deductions. Now, at this stage, the best result for our sleuths, of course, would be a completely correct deduction, all 3 right. But I should point out that the next best result, oddly enough, would be a completely incorrect deduction, because that then will eliminate a room, a weapon, and, of course, a suspect from their inquiries. So, Valerie and Johnny, in which room was the murder committed? With which weapon? And who do you think's the murderer?
You go for that.
Well,
You want the study, don't
Yes, we thought it was definitely the study. He probably blundered into the study, you see, because he didn't know the house very
you? He was
well.
looking for his coat. You perhaps went into the
We
wrong
thought,
one.
and we are certain that who would he blunder into the study but a syringe and Mrs. Peacock.
Mrs. Peacock?
Very suspicious
Unthinkable.
about...
Absolutely unthinkable. I was distraught.
Yes, well, that's what you've said.
Dream.
That's what you've said, Mrs. Peacock, but they suspect you. All right.
It's the size of the syringe to put a hound down. We think that's very suspicious.
You think that's
Wasn't her
a
job.
fake story, you think? Well, we'll discover that in a second. Let's move on now to Edwina and Richard.
Staying with the same analysis, we've got the room, the drawing room, we have the weapon, the billiard cue, and the suspect is Colonel Mustard.
Colonel Mustard against him.
This is rubbish. The boy's not worth going to prison for.
Jealousy is a well-known motive for murder.
You think jealousy was the motive?
It's certainly part of it, I think.
Let's go back here and recap. Valerie and Johnny, you said you thought that the room where the murder was committed was the study, the weapon was the syringe, and the guilty person is Mrs. Peacock. You're completely wrong on all three. Now, Edwina and Richard, you said it was the drawing room, you thought it was the billiard cue, and you've accused Colonel Mustard. And I have to tell you that you also are completely wrong.
How marvellous.
Completely wrong. So, we've now definitely eliminated the drawing room and the study, the syringe and the billiard cue, and, of course, Mrs. Peacock and Colonel Mustard, so you must be feeling very relieved. But I have to ask you to stay with us, please, for the rest of the investigation, because you may be material witnesses. You may have seen something, even though you don't realise it, that implicates one of these four people here. All right, there we have to leave our investigations just for a few moments. In part two, more evidence and clues vital to solving the murder of Gordon Ferrer. So join us after the break. Welcome back to part two of Cluedo. Hunt saboteur Gordon Ferrer has been murdered, but who killed him? And with which weapon? And in which room? At Arlington Grange? Well, perhaps you think you're getting close to solving the case at home. If so, let's have a look. Here's what we've discovered so far tonight. We've definitely eliminated the drawing room and the study from our inquiries. We've eliminated the syringe and the billiard cue. And Mrs. Peacock and Colonel Mustard are no longer under suspicion. But we still have 4 possible rooms, 4 possible weapons, and 4 possible murderers. But which one of them is the killer? In a moment, our studio detectives will continue to cross-examine the suspects and, of course, the witnesses if they wish to. But first, some very important new evidence has come to light. We begin in the kitchen, where Gordon has confronted the Reverend Green.
I can't. Don't you understand?
No, it's you that doesn't understand. Look, if you don't give evidence to the police, I might have to tell all your good friends and neighbours how you've been helping us over the years, telling us when the hunt's going to meet, what covers they're intending to flush.
That's blackmail.
Just helping you towards your Christian duty, Vicar.
Oh, I'm sorry, am I interrupting? No, not at all. I was just going to be off. You better get going. Oh, you know what's good for you. Came in to tidy up.
Where is he?
Gone, I think.
I do hope so, for his sake.
Well, if we didn't know that she was innocent, that could have looked very bleak indeed for Mrs. Peacock, but she is innocent. So our studio sleuths will now put this fresh evidence to good use. In round 2, they can cross-examine any suspect or any witness that they want to. Each question and answer must, though, be followed straight away by a deduction. So we're going to start with Valerie and with Johnny.
Right, we've decided we've got to go for the Reverend Green, and we want to know, why are you so reluctant to give evidence to the victim?
It's a very difficult situation for me, because on this stand are not only my dear friends, but members of my flock. They come to my church regularly. But I have to say, I find it despicable what they do in the hunt, and will have nothing to do with any of it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
You still haven't explained why you wouldn't give evidence. You don't want to lose friends, is that it?
I'm afraid that is it. It's rather an unreligious thing, but I'm afraid that is it.
All right, would you like to make a deduction based on that rather emotional answer?
Yes, we think that's emotion. We think emotion got the better of him. We think in the kitchen, Reverend Green done the deed with, we think, the candlestick.
All right. Valerie and Johnny, you've said the kitchen, the candlestick, and the Reverend Green. Well, I can tell you that you've got 2 out of 3 of those deductions correct. Well done.
Which is the third?
Let's move on now to Edwina and Richard. Your question first.
Well, we'd like to have another go at Mrs. White, because we're not satisfied. We caught you lying. When you took the coat off Mrs. Peacock, you told Mrs. Peacock that the young man had gone, when you knew perfectly well that wasn't so. Now, why did you do that?
I'm afraid you're remembering things wrongly. I didn't say he had left. I said, I think he's gone. I would never lie to Mrs. Peacock. I've worked for her for years. She knows she can rely on me.
All right, I think you pressed her just about as hard as you can. Can we have a deduction, please?
Deduction is as follows. We think it's the kitchen, the candlestick, and Mrs. White.
Say the kitchen, the candlestick, and Mrs. White. I can tell you that you've got 1 out of those 3 deductions correct. All right, Valerie and Johnny, can we have another question from you, please?
Yes, it's a question to Mrs. White. We want to know what she did with the scissors.
The scissors? That was on the tray when I was treating him in the drawing room, and that stayed on the tray. I carried the tray to the kitchen, and I left it on the table.
So they would have been on the kitchen table? Right.
I suppose so.
It seems... We think...
Yes, I want the deduction.
It's clear. We think it was the kitchen. We think it was the scissors. And we think it was the Reverend Green.
Well, let's not be too hasty. Tell us why you think that.
Well, he really likes to play it all ways, doesn't he? I mean, he wants to help the hunt saboteurs. He wants to stay in with the folk in the big house. He's a man of cloth, but not a man of principle, I don't think.
First, I thought it may have been for his love for Mrs. Peacock and his devotion to her that it may have been. But then we realised later that he's been up to all kinds of devious things, and he's going to lose his job.
All right, thank you. Well, I can tell you. It was the kitchen, it was the scissors, and it was the Reverend Green.
I don't know what came over me. I've been part of the community for over 15 years. All my friends are here. My flock. My roots. I've given everything to this parish, and I don't have the strength to go on to new ventures, to start afresh. And that's what it would have meant. I just think the prospect was so cruel, so unfair. I didn't go back into the kitchen to do him any harm. I don't know why I picked up the scissors. I just wanted to challenge him. But he laughed at me. There they were in my hands. And all I could see was his bare neck. And I forgot who I was. God help me, I actually forgot who I was.
So, there we are. It was the Reverend Green who murdered Gordon Ferrer in the kitchen, and he used the scissors to do it. My apologies, of course, to all the other witnesses here tonight. They are entirely cleared of suspicion and, of course, free to go. And, of course, our congratulations have to go to Valerie and Johnny. You played a very, very good game, and you tracked the killer down. And I also have to say real commiserations to Edwina and Richard, because you also guessed it at just about the same time, but you didn't get the chance to come in. So, a big round of applause to both teams, please. And I certainly hope that you've enjoyed playing Armchair Detective tonight. And don't forget, in just a few moments, I'll be giving you details of how you can win a murder mystery weekend. We'll be back, of course, next week to solve another murder at Arlington Grange. But for now, from all of us here on Cluedo, a very good night to you. Good night. To enter our special competition, phone 0891 606 707. The lines are open until midnight Tuesday. Just answer a simple question based on tonight's programme, and you could win a murder mystery weekend for 2.